In 2013, Kotaku spoke with Mario, Zelda, and Pikmin creator Shigeru Miyamoto and asked him, "Do you feel like you've ever made a bad game?" To which he eloquently replied, "Yeah." Miyamoto would then immediately change the subject to talking about the then new Pikmin 3, rather than ponder any longer on his past mistakes. But the interviewer would press him more on the subject. What was the bad game you made? "I wouldn't say that we've made a bad game, per se, but a game I think we could have done more with was Zelda II, The Adventure of Link." At first, this is a surprising answer. I mean, you just said you have made a bad game, why are you sidestepping, whatever? The pick itself is also noteworthy. The first ever sequel to one of the most recognizable franchises in gaming history. But then again, perhaps he does have a point. At its best, it can be a fun side-scrolling adventure game, and at its worst, Zelda 2 becomes obtuse and frustrating. I've beaten Zelda 2 3 times, and I get a good deal of enjoyment out of it, though even I have to admit a chunk of my appreciation for Zelda 2 stems from what the game, or another one like it, has the potential to be, rather than solely what it is. If only there was some better, more fully realized version of Zelda 2 that we could play. One that may better fit Miyamoto's vision of the game. And that's exactly what I have right here. And if you're wondering where I got this game from, I picked up an old labelless NES cartridge at a flea market, and when I put it into my console, this is what popped up. The files of the game were extracted from a declassified hard drive from Bin Laden's compound. I opened up a portal into an alternate dimension where only the best, fully realized versions of video games exist. Also known as the dimension where Scholar of the First Sin has never been uttered. My uncle works at Nintendo, and he gave it to me. You may wonder why it feels like I'm circling around the obvious, but I have no idea what you're talking about, honestly. There is absolutely no precedence of why someone would lie about something like this. There is no reason to hide anything from anyone. Now that we have all of that established, what's so special about this alternate version of Zelda 2? New widescreen resolution, new overworld locales, new puzzles, new items, new enemies, new side quests, new maps for the overworld and dungeons, new saving system, new obstacles, new vertical screens, new tile sets, new shortcuts. This without question has become the definitive way to play Zelda 2. Whether you're a diehard fan of it already, you bounced off of it before, or if you've yet to ever give it a chance, this is the version you should play. So if you want to play it yourself, use Google to look up when the next blood moon is so you can perform the sacrificial ritual to open up the interdimensional portal. It's an experience that's deserving to have its surprises intact for old and new players alike. But you clicked on a YouTube video for someone to talk about this alternate dimension version of Zelda 2, so I'm just gonna keep talking. The differences between the two versions are immediate upon starting a new file. This new version quickly sets its tone in the ways it intends to build on the NES game. The world is not only more expansive with new areas to explore, but it's also denser with secrets not originally present in older areas. The road to the first dungeon back on the NES had you go through an empty desert field of nothing. This new version adds in mountainous terrain, giving the area more intrigue and a new secret to find, along with a shortcut towards the end of the area to cut back on mindless backtracking. Upon entering the first dungeon, you quickly learn, wait, is that a heart container? The original Zelda 2 had you collect 4 hearts that were scattered across the world, along with 4 magic containers, which were immediate upgrades for Link. But in this new, wild, wacky version, you have to find portions of upgrades instead. You'll have to find 3 hearts or 3 magic jars in order to earn that stat upgrade, which means that there are significantly more of each to find now. This is where the world feeling a lot more denser with secrets comes in. Cutting down from wandering around endlessly for that one last heart piece you need, you're eventually able to find 2 NPCs that sell you half of a map. Buying them shows you tiles on the overworld where you missed a secret. Oftentimes, you'll still need to do some looking or puzzling to find the missing item, but being told in what exact area something is a massive time saver. In both of these versions, each town has new spells and or abilities for Link to learn. Usually you'll need to complete a quest in order to gain access to them. This new version sometimes taking some liberties in the quests that you have to do. In the original game, one of the quests has a woman saying she lost her mirror. Cool, just Gotta find her mirror. Simple enough. This is the second quest a player would come across in the game. The first one also having you trying to return a lost item. In the first quest, the item was in the back of one of the overworld's caves. And this area we're in right now has numerous caves, some of which are blocked by currently impassable boulders. So it's easy to assume that the mirror has to be in one of those caves, or maybe somewhere else hidden in the overworld. Except, no. Instead, you go down one screen from the woman and find an empty house. You walk over to the table and stab at it, and you find the lost mirror. Unless you have the instinct to stab everything, you'll be needing a kid on the playground or Nintendo Power to help you out here. In this new version, she explicitly states she lost her mirror in a graveyard. And what's this? Just outside of town? A brand new graveyard area that holds the mirror? Oh, this is much better. There's another quest in the original where a woman says she's thirsty. Okay. You walk over 14 tiles away from her house to a fountain, stab at it to somehow collect water, walk back over to her to present the water, and that's how you get the fire spell. In this alternate version, the same lady mentions how the fountains have dried up in the town. The quest that follows is full of purely new areas that ends with you defeating some of Ganon's evil wizards and unblocking the flow of the town's water source. I think it's pretty clear how a quest that includes discovery, action puzzles, and combat is better than walking over a few feet to the left to find the arbitrary flag for progress. Back on the NES, the only way that you could save the game was after you got a game over. Actually, if you have a second controller plugged into the NES, if you pause the first controller and then press up and A on the second controller, you'll be taken to a save screen. The game doesn't tell you this, but you're able to learn this from the very bottom of page 47 in the game's manual. Doing this still kicks you out of the game, depletes all of your EXP, and adds 1 over to your overall counter, so there's no real plus to doing it this way, other than maybe saving a few seconds from between all your lives. So glad this game was worth it, just so some smart ass commenter can, actually, me before I do it myself. That was weird. Anyway, the only way to save was to get a game over. In the towns, there were always women to talk to that replenish your health or magic. And this alternate dimension version adds a third woman that can save your game whenever you visit her. It's worth mentioning around this point that back on the NES, unless you got a game over in the very last dungeon of the game, you get sent back to the beginning palace, which is really annoying. Whereas the widescreen version has the mercy to send you back to the start of any dungeon you have the misfortune to get a game over in. Let's talk about some of the new items in this version Miyamoto wishes he had been able to design. Many deaths in the NES version will be landing yourself into an instant death pit. When most of the game you'll be playing with 3 lives before you get kicked out, that really sucks. Early on in this gift from Far Beyond the Stars, you'll be able to rescue a red fairy. She stays in your inventory, and whenever you land yourself into an instant death pit, she'll rescue you and you'll only take a health penalty. There is a circle of boulders south of Death Mountain. You need to crush the boulders in a specific order, and doing so gains you access to a new secret area that houses the Red Ring, an item from the first Legend of Zelda. Like its predecessor, it grants Link a boost of defense. The order in which you're supposed to crush the boulders is randomized each run, so don't bother studying my footage. In an easy-to-forget corner of the map is an area where you can pick up a leg of meat, another item that's originally from the first Legend of Zelda. What it does here is, Link occasionally drops it down while on the overworld map, and enemies flock to it. By the end of the game, random encounters start feeling too frequent and annoying. If you're maxed out on levels, they'll even be pointless. Grabbing this hidden item makes it easier to run from these encounters, and helps mitigate those frustrations. All over the world in dungeons are 12 hidden orange slimes to find. Some will require you to challenge them in combat, while others will be vanquished only by solving a unique puzzle. After you dispel of them all, you're able to unlock access to a new island. Exploring it yields a brand new sword upgrade, which allows you to defeat armored enemies that you otherwise wouldn't be able to damage with just your sword. Scattered around the NES Zelda II were 6 Link dolls you could find. Collecting one would increase your life by 1. Wow. But these were not permanent upgrades. Once you lose that life, it's gone, and you cannot recollect a Link doll either. In this far better version, there's 4 Link dolls to collect that permanently increase the number of lives you start with after a game over. All these new items and tweaks I've mentioned, they make the game sound significantly easier. And largely, it is. You start the game a bit weaker than the NES original, but end up much stronger. These new buffs aren't casually handed to the player, but are given through effort and exploration. Overall, these additions are a substantial upgrade. The NES original was frustrating, obtuse, annoying, stupid, and dumb. There was fun to be had in between these hitches, but this enhanced version smooths over the experience into one that's more consistently fun. It expands the world of Zelda II in natural ways that make sense within the design of the original and takes in familiar spirits from Zelda games that would have come after it. It's not all a walk in the park though. The original Zelda II was a side-scroller, but there was never any real emphasis on platforming, which is probably for the best, as Link's jumping height can take some getting used to. On rare occasions are jumps that ask you to have Link jump as high as he possibly can. This cannot be achieved from standing against the wall you want to jump over and simply hitting the jump button. In order to achieve maximum height, Link must be moving and make his jump before touching a wall. If even his foot ends up touching the wall too soon, it'll ruin the jump's height. Some of the new areas in this alternate Zelda 2 do lean heavily on platforming. This can lead to some trial and error as you try to get a feel for Link's peculiar jumping. Another interesting difference is, the NES game had a spell named Fairy, which turned Link into a fairy who could fly around. This also allowed him to slip through locked doors without using a key, or he could just use it to fly over enemies if you want. Since this didn't lead to any interesting level design or puzzles, and in fact it let you just skip some, it has been completely scrapped in this alternate version. Instead, you get transformed into a cuckoo, who can flap his wings to float slowly. This one change has led to some stark level design differences between the two versions, though the results are certainly a net positive. Another interesting change between the versions is where they put the magic key. It's an item that can be used an unlimited amount of times for any locked door. Back on the NES, you would have to get this before going into the 6th dungeon, as that dungeon didn't have any keys to collect in it. The alternate version of Zelda 2 waits to give you this magic key, and thus completely revamps the 6th dungeon to behave as any other normal dungeon, which is yet another huge plus, as otherwise things just become you wandering around the dungeon for the item and boss. The worst part of Zelda 2 is unquestionably the last dungeon, known as the Great Palace. It's a massive rambling maze of repeating rooms which houses the most annoying variations of enemies from throughout your adventure. There's no items or keys to find, it's all about just stumbling your way through until you manage to find the end. This alternate version takes a bold direction in attempting to fix this by making it worse. Now the Great Palace is even larger, and there are numerous dead ends you can find yourself butting your head against, including areas with locked doors you can't get past, because this dungeon still does not have any keys, except for one, and that's the previously mentioned magic key. After wandering around and finding every possible dead end, we come across a refight of Dungeon 5's boss, who is guarding the key that we so longed for. And now we are able to trudge ourselves along to the final boss. Oh, this place is so massive. If you figured out how to get to the end of the Great Palace back on the NES, or if you just followed a map, it doesn't take too long to get to the end of it. Here I am at the start of the dungeon. Less than 20 minutes later, I'm fighting the last boss. Here I am at the start of the dungeon. A little more than an hour later, I'm finally fighting the last boss. Shadow Link in Zelda 2 is infamous for being ridiculously unfair. He is excessively good at following after you, landing consecutive hits, and somehow dodging most every attack. It feels like a nearly impossible fight, where I felt blessed even landing 2 hits on him. Unless you crouch in the corner and just spam attack, then you just automatically win somehow. I did not have to do the crouch method in this alternate version. It was still tricky to land hits, but with my new upgrades and seemingly better hit detection on Shadow Link, the fight felt like how it was always meant to. I still consider this to be the worst part of Zelda 2, and with it being even more of a substantial undertaking in this version, I have to wish that this alternate version took the last dungeon in a different direction than it did. If they were to do that, the game would start going into more fan game territory rather than enhanced remake territory, but we would not have lost anything of value. I didn't say fan game. I didn't say that. I never would have used that word. There's one last topic worth talking about here. Upon defeating Shadow Link on the NES, you're able to restart the game in Second Quest mode, which is essentially New Game Plus, where you start the game with all of your upgraded levels and spells. Nothing's different apart from that. It's just cathartic. The alternate dimension Second Quest has a tad bit more to it. Our second quest begins and Zelda is actually awake, making it clear that she wants us to defeat Dark Link once again. The rest of the game has very minor changes. Mostly the boss encounters get slightly tweaked to make them marginally more difficult. But I'm level 9 with all of these upgrades, so it doesn't matter. Second verse, mostly the same as the first. We again defeat Shadow Link and we bottle up some of his blood. Doing this grants us access to a completely new area, only unlockable in this second quest. There's nothing as substantial as a whole new palace dungeon, but there's still about an hour's worth of new content to go through. There's a new town where you can only progress by talking to a particular NPC 7 times in a row. There's no indicator or hint that you have to do this. You just do it. This feels in spirit to the original Zelda 2, though I mean that in the worst way possible. The highlight of this fresh new content is at the very end, where we cap everything off with 3 unique boss fights. The last of which is something Zelda 2 never had, a fight with Ganon himself. His fight is not like any other encounter with him we've seen in the series before. His spirit is being contained within a black slime, which I can only assume is a mass of sludge from primordial times, making him an original evil which had existed long before the dawn of first light. You're able to bounce on him, but doing so does not do damage. Instead, you'll want to jump over him and stab into his sides. Doing so eventually expels his spirit from the slime, and shows he moves around exactly like the anti-fairies that lived in the dungeons. I hope your mind's eye is trained enough to be able to quickly imagine trajectories while staying on top of numerous projectiles trying to damage you, because this is the only state you'll be able to nick off Ganon's health points, and he gets fast. Being wholly original, this boss was designed with Link's higher than typical stats in mind. That is to say, he hits hard. But after a few attempts, we managed to defeat the evil before he's able to fully resurrect. And now our adventure is finally over. If you're interested in action side-scrollers, I recommend checking this game out. It easily replaces the original game, something I doubt Nintendo would like to hear. But as much as I would love for them to attempt to remake Zelda 2 themselves, I don't see that happening. But now they really don't need to, because we already have it. I may have gone over the broad strokes of the new content, but the game is still worth experiencing for yourself. Plus, there's some stuff that I wasn't able to get into. But for now, thank you for watching. Good night. I love ya, and always remember, keep gaming.